Welcome to a discussion by Popular Beethoven magazine.
Great to be here.
Have you ever really stopped to think about whether humans are inherently good deep down?
It's a huge question, isn't it? And it's something we were looking at, sparked by that recent article in Popular Beethoven.
Right, the one that really digs into this idea.
Yeah, and what's great is how it pulls in so many different viewpoints for you to think about. Religious texts, ancient philosophy.
History, even just like everyday stuff we see.
Exactly. It really pushes you to kind of examine this belief that seems so common, this idea of inherent goodness.
It does seem to be everywhere, that message. That we're all fundamentally good, maybe a bit special even.
But the article asks, okay, does that feeling actually line up with, well, what history shows us? Or what philosophers have been saying for centuries?
So that's our mission for this deep dive, right? To unpack those contrasting views based on what's in the Popular Beethoven piece.
And it kicks off with this sort of modern paradox.
How?
Well, this emphasis on inherent goodness, yet you kind of see this rise in maybe self-centeredness, or people being quite fragile if their self-image gets challenged.
Yeah, I think I see that. You notice it online a lot, maybe. The curated lives, the need for likes.
That kind of thing. It feels like there's a tension there, doesn't it? Navigating the world, seeing these different takes on human nature.
It definitely feels less like inherent goodness sometimes and more like needing constant validation.
Right. And then the article pivots and brings in a really starkly different view, the biblical one.
Oh, okay.
It points straight to Genesis 8:21, and the quote is, every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. Pretty strong stuff.
Wow, yeah, that's a challenging starting point. It suggests our default isn't kindness, but something more selfish.
That seems to be the idea, that it's a constant struggle against those tendencies and maybe needing some, well, divine help or guidance.
Okay, so that's one major perspective.
But it's not just a religious idea, and the article makes that clear. It shows echoes in classical philosophy.
Like Plato.
Exactly, like Plato. Remember his analogy in the Republic? The soul as a chariot.
Oh, yeah, with the two horses.
Yeah.
One is reason.
Right. And the other is pulling towards our baser desires, appetites.
And if those desires aren't checked?
It leads to chaos,
Yeah.
injustice. It kind of mirrors that biblical view of flawed tendencies needing control. That internal struggle is right there in Plato.
That image really sticks with you, the chariot. You can almost feel that pull.
It's very vivid. And then you have Aristotle coming at it slightly differently in the Nicomachean Ethics.
What was his take?
He basically argued that virtue being good, it's not something innate. It's not something you're born with.
So you have to learn it. Or
Pretty much.
pretty much.
He said, we become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts. Goodness is an achievement. It takes work.
Like practicing an instrument or a sport, you get better by doing it.
Precisely. It requires consistent effort, cultivation. It's not a passive state.
Okay, so philosophy adds more weight to the idea that maybe inherently good isn't the full picture.
And then the article really brings out the heavy hitters. Historical evidence.
Right. This is where it gets tough to read, I imagine.
It can be. When you consider things like, say, the Roman Colosseum, the sheer scale of public violence as entertainment,
Yeah, it's hard to square that with innate goodness.
or just the prevalence of war throughout all of history. The article mentions the mass killings, the torture, rape, slavery. It's a grim list.
And not just ancient history either. The 20th century.
Exactly. The Holocaust, Stalin's purges, Mao's famines, Cambodia, Rwanda.
The Japanese war crimes mentioned, the comfort women, those horrific experiments.
When you lay all that out, the article suggests that believing in inherent goodness starts to feel, well, it uses the word irrational.
It's a powerful counter-argument looking at that historical record.
And there's a quote from Seneca in there, too, the Roman philosopher. We are all wicked. What we condemn in another, each of us finds in himself.
Oof. That makes you look inwards, doesn't it? Stop pointing fingers quite so quickly.
It encourages that introspection, yeah. And Cicero, another Roman, argued that virtue isn't assumed. It requires actively following moral duties, using reason and justice. Again, it's about effort, not just being.
So history and philosophy seem to lean away from the inherently good idea. What about just daily life?
The article brings that up, too. Think about kids, little kids.
Okay.
Do toddlers just naturally start saying please and thank you, or sharing their toys without any prompting?
Huh, definitely not in my experience. You have to teach that stuff constantly.
Right. So if those basic politeness things aren't instinctive, what does that suggest about our natural state?
That maybe our natural inclination is more towards me first.
Seems like it. And the article also mentions, sadly, things like bullying or cruelty that can show up even among young children. Those impulses are there and need correcting.
So it's suggesting that moral behavior needs to be learned, instilled.
Exactly. And it connects this to wisdom traditions again. Proverbs 22.6.
Hmm.
Train up a child in the way he should go. The emphasis is on the training. And Plato, in his later work Laws, he also stressed how crucial education is. Otherwise, he thought, people revert to natural selfishness.
So ongoing effort again.
Yeah, and Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, talked about the daily practice of self-control needed for moral progress. Day by day, you have to work at it.
It keeps coming back to that goodness as a practice, not a given.
And the article then raises a really interesting point about our modern context.
Which is?
The idea that living in societies heavily influenced by, say, Judeo-Christian values might actually give us a misleading impression.
How so?
Yeah.
We see decent behavior around us and assume it's innate.
Kinda. It calls it a potential veneer of decency. We mistake the social norms, which have deep historical roots in these value systems, for something inherent in people themselves.
Okay, can you get an example?
The article uses the historical conversion of Germanic barbarian tribes. Before Christianity, their cultures often glorified raiding, violence, conquest. That was the norm.
Right, very different from today's general values in those regions.
Vastly different. Now, those behaviors face strong social disapproval and legal consequences. But back then, that was the expected way for many tribes.
So the underlying nature hasn't necessarily changed, but the cultural framework, the laws, the values, they shape behavior dramatically.
Precisely. It connects back to Aristotle's idea of the polis, the community, the state, cultivating virtue through shared laws and values.
Right.
Goodness becomes, in part, a product of the society.
Okay, that's a really thought-provoking angle. So where does that leave us regarding this belief in inherent goodness?
Well, the article suggests there's a danger in holding on to that belief too strongly, or maybe too naively.
A danger? Like what?
If we assume everyone's basically good, maybe we neglect character education. Maybe we focus too much on boosting self-esteem and not enough on teaching self-control, resilience, how to handle negative feelings or impulses.
And the consequence could be generations not really equipped to manage those harder parts of being human.
That seems to be the concern raised. And it also poses a theological or philosophical challenge. If humans are inherently good, why the need for a transcendent moral source?
Right. Why would you need God or the Bible's guidance if your internal compass is already pointing true north?
That undermines the basis for that kind of external moral authority. The article brings up Plato again, arguing for a standard beyond just human opinion.
And the Bible providing that through things like the Ten Commandments.
Exactly. Without that external anchor, if you just assume inherent goodness, you risk sliding into moral relativism.
Where good and bad become subjective, maybe, and you can explain away bad actions.
Yeah, you start blaming external factors, society, upbringing, whatever, rather than acknowledging individual failings or choices. The article concludes that evil stems more from a faulty conscience, missing values, or lack of impulse control.
So the solution isn't just assuming goodness, it's actively building it.
Through good values, just laws, self-discipline, and for many, that element of divine guidance. He comes back to that Seneca quote again.
The one about needing to believe you're bad first.
To be good, you must first believe you are bad. Acknowledging the potential for wrong is the first step towards striving for right.
It really flips the common narrative on its head.
It does. And it leaves you with that really critical question the article poses. How do we make good people?
Not are people good, but how do we make them good?
Yes. And the answer suggested is that combination.
Yeah.
Moral education, self-discipline, maybe divine help. It's an active process.
So wrapping this up, this discussion from Popular Beethoven magazine has really laid out this tension, hasn't it? Between the common belief in inherent goodness
and these challenging perspectives from scripture, philosophy, history, and even just observing kids grow up. It gives you a lot to chew on.
It really does. As you, the listener, go about your day, what do you see? What resonates more? The idea of innate goodness or this constant struggle the article describes.
It's worth reflecting on and keeping that final question in mind. How do we make good people? What does that mean for us individually and for society?
If this has piqued your interest, Popular Beethoven magazine has more articles exploring similar deep themes. You might want to check out titles like God's justice and the human suffering, or Plutarch, Beethoven and managing anger, and also modes of living. Lots more to explore on their website.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive from Popular Beethoven magazine. Hopefully it's given you some valuable food for thought.
Thanks for listening.